Hello from Jonathan and from me. Welcome to Friday's programme.
First, they subjected their victim to an horrific life of torture and abuse. Tonight, 5 members of a family from Luton have been convicted over his death.
Vulnerable Michael Gilbert was kept as a slave and routinely beaten, shot with an airgun and stabbed. Some of the brutal attacks were even recorded on mobile phones.
When they finally went too far and killed their 26-year-old victim, they tried to cover their tracks by cutting up his body and dumping it in a local lake known as the Blue Lagoon. After a jury at Luton Crown Court returned guilty verdicts, one senior detective described the case as the worst abuse he'd ever seen. Well, Neil Bradford was in court for us. Neil, it is an extraordinary case.
Yes, this is the house described in court as a madhouse, chaotic and dysfunctional, now occupied by new tenants who have no connection to the Watt family. But what happened here in January last year seems almost too far-fetched to be believed. Michael Gilbert, a vulnerable adult, was held like a prisoner, beaten and burnt just for fun. He was treated like a slave and his benefits money was stolen. The beatings got so bad, they eventually killed him.
Go. Go on, man. It feels awkward, doesn't it? It's recording, man. Go on, man.
We've stopped this mobile phone footage before it becomes too graphic, but it is a clear illustration of the kind of violence Michael Gilbert suffered on a daily basis. In January last year, the violence he suffered got so bad it eventually killed him. Those responsible then cut up his body before disposing of it in a lake known as the Blue Lagoon. After 6 weeks of harrowing evidence and more than 5 days of deliberations, the jury at Luton Crown Court returned this morning with guilty verdicts on all but one of the defendants.
We're pleased with the result today. It's been a traumatic time for our family and nothing will bring Michael back, but let's hope this will stop other people from violent behaviour mainly.
Michael Gilbert's main tormentor James Watt, his girlfriend Natasha Oldfield and Nicola Roberts, the girlfriend of Richard Watt, were found guilty of his murder. He had earlier pleaded guilty to familial homicide. Another brother, Robert Watt, was cleared of murder during the trial, but today was found guilty of allowing or causing the death of a vulnerable adult. His mother, Jennifer Smith-Dennis, was also found guilty of that charge. The men's father, Antonio, was today cleared of all charges and walked free from court. James Watt seemed obsessed with keeping Michael captive and often kept him handcuffed in his bedroom. It was here that he died from his injuries and his body was dismembered. James's girlfriend Natasha Oldfield also tortured Michael Gilbert and helped dismember and dispose of his body. On one occasion, she was seen to repeatedly hit him in the stomach using a hammer. A note in her diary showed an idea for a spoof game show, awarding cash prizes for attacks against him. An indication, the prosecution said, to the casual attitude towards violence in the Watt household. Nicola Roberts, the girlfriend of Richard Watt, who gave evidence against his own family, was also involved with the torture of Michael, jumping on his stomach just days before his death. It was her car that was used to carry Michael's body to the Blue Lagoon. This is her during a police interview, telling officers when she had last seen Michael Gilbert.
He'd stay with us every now and then he'd go say he was staying with another friend. He was with friends, really.
The men's mother, Jennifer Smith-Dennis, was fully aware of the abuse Michael suffered. She was involved in the cover-up and even helped mop up the blood. She, along with all the other defendants, knew what was happening, but failed to confront it, prevent it, or seek help. They will now be sentenced on Monday.
Michael Gilbert was described in court as something of an enigma, a child who never grew up, unable to cope with adult life. He had a troubled start and ended up in care in his teenage years, but he seemed unable to escape the clutches of his abusers.
He was robbed of dignity in death and in life. Michael Gilbert's body was dismembered and then dumped in a disused quarry. For 5 months, his headless corpse lay undiscovered among the murk and waste of the Blue Lagoon in Aylesea. Before his death, this house in Luton was not his home, but his prison. He lived here like a slave. After years of escalating violence, he died in January last year. Despite a difficult start in life, Michael Gilbert had a largely happy childhood. But by the time he reached his teenage years, he was taken into care. It was there he first met his main tormentor, James Watt, gradually growing more distant from his own family. As an adult, he seemed unable to cope with life or people.
He wasn't quite wise to people in the way they were and how people would be, or the fact that he could get taken advantage of for money or anything. He was quite kind-hearted.
He'd do anything for anybody.
Michael Gilbert seemed unable to escape the clutches of the Watt family. Behind these doors, he was abused, tormented and threatened, even handcuffed to his bed at night so he wouldn't escape. Much of what happened to him here is far too graphic to report, and there seems to be little explanation as to why there was such extreme violence.
There were some serious injuries that he received over the years, been shot twice with airgun pellets, being severely beaten, his feet burnt with boiling water.
No one appeared to notice Michael's suffering, even though the Watt family were well known to the law and their landlords. In the 7 years he lived with them in various parts of Luton, the family were evicted from 2 council houses and police were called to their various homes on more than 180 occasions. In 2007, Michael Gilbert came close to seeking help. He told police officers here in Luton that he'd been living in Cambridge, but had been brought back to the town against his will. A statement he later retracted, saying he feared reprisals. Instead, he asked officers to drive him back to Cambridge.
I've thought about it long and hard, and I don't think that on that occasion there was much more we could have done. You're right, hindsight is a perfect science, but I think that we did what was possible at that time and that nobody could really have predicted that we would end up where we are today.
His main problem was he had a heart, and it was too big.
Too kind and let people walk all over him and stuff, really.
Too forgiving.
Yeah.
They were qualities that should have enriched his life. Instead, they were qualities that may have contributed to an untimely and most undignified death.
So, Neil, back to you. Would you say that Michael Gilbert was failed at every turn?
I think it's too early to say whether he was failed by the system, but there does appear to be very many questions that need answering tonight. He appears to have slipped through a very large net. After all, he was in the care of social services as a teenager. He was a vulnerable adult. And we know that the police were called to the Watt family household when he was living there, on average, about twice a month. And, of course, there was the occasion that he made a complaint which he later dropped. Those are all questions that will be answered in a serious case review which has been launched tonight by Luton Borough Council. It will look at the social services handling of Michael Gilbert's case and all the other agencies involved. It will publish the details in due course. In the meantime, his abusers are facing a very long prison sentence tonight.
All right, Neil, we'll leave that there. Thank you very much.